from Boston Scientific India and INTAS, I welcome you all to the fifth session of ECG Academy directed by Dr. T.S. Clare. ECG Academy is one of its kind online course designed for all India physicians. The aim of this academy is to offer in-depth knowledge about ECG interpretation and helping everyone recognize wide variety of clinical abnormalities. Course Director Padma Bhushan Dr. T.S. Clare, who's recently moved to Fortis Memorial Research Institute, Gurgaon, is now the Chairman Cardiac Sciences Fortis Memorial Research Institute and also the Chairman for EP Program Pan Fortis. Dr. Clare is an expert in interventional cardiology and electrophysiology, doing maximum number of radiofrequency ablations, and is the first one to implant ICD, CRTP, and CRTT devices in the country. He has about 150 publications in national and international journals and has been on the editorial board of Indian Heart Journal. He was also the founding president of the Indian Heart Rhythm Society. Dr. Clare has personally trained more than 200 cardiologists in the last 25 years to perform advanced techniques of angiography, angioplasty, and electrophysiology. Additionally, he is also an honorary professor of cardiology for Banaras Hindu University. Today, we have a very esteemed guest speaker on the panel, Colonel Dr. Sunil Sofat amongst us, who is the Director Cardiology, Electrophysiology and Pacing at JP Hospital, Noida. Dr. Sofat is an MBBS, MD, DM, FSCI certified from Armed Forces Medical College and University, Pune. Dr. Sofat is a versatile interventional cardiologist with experience in all fields of interventional and non-interventional cardiology, having actively been involved in the cardiology programs at various tertiary care hospitals of the armed forces. Our third speaker for the day would be Dr. Avinash Verma, who has recently moved to FMRI Gurgaon as a senior consultant cardiologist and electrophysiologist. He's done his DNB cardiology from Scott's Heart Institute, Delhi, and is among the few dedicated cardiac electrophysiologists in India performing over 2,000 cardiac implantable electronic devices and radiofrequency ablations. I welcome you all today. The first session on short RP tachycardia will be presided over by Dr. Sofat, followed by long RP tachycardia by Dr. Avinash. The sessions will be moderated by Dr. T.S. Clare. Over to you, Dr. Sofat.
Thank you so much for inviting me for this talk. And I'll straight away start sharing my screen.
Yes, sir.
Right? Okay. So we'll go ahead with the presentation without wasting time. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes, sir.
Is my presentation visible?
Yes, sir.
So I thank Boston Scientific for giving me an opportunity to come and speak to you all this evening on the topic of short RP tachycardia. I'm actually filling in for Dr. Clare, and so we're really busy. So I thank him for this opportunity for me to present. I'm actually from JP Hospital, not from Fortis Memorial Research Institute. The slide is a little incorrect because this was meant for Dr. Clare. And so I will be talking to you on the topic of short RP tachycardia. By short RP tachycardia, we mean that the distance between the R wave in the QRS complex and the P wave which comes after the QRS during the tachycardia is short. It is less than 90 milliseconds. So I will be talking to you about this topic. Now, so what exactly does one mean with a narrow QRS tachycardia? What is a narrow QRS tachycardia? So basically, any tachycardia in which the QRS is similar to the pre-existing sinus rhythm, ECG, is a narrow QRS tachycardia, and the QRS duration should be less than 100 milliseconds. 100 to 120 milliseconds is an intermediate duration, and anything more than 120 milliseconds is a broad QRS tachycardia. So ideally, the QRS duration should be less than 100 milliseconds. That is a narrow complex tachycardia. Now, 100 to 120 milliseconds is an intermediate kind of duration, but typically a normal QRS complex is 80 to 100 milliseconds. Sometimes we can even go up to 120 milliseconds because of some interventricular conduction effects. So it should be less than 3 small spares on the ECG. And this kind of complex is usually achieved because of the ventricular depolarization happening through the His-Purkinje system. When the entire depolarization is happening through the His-Purkinje system, you will have a narrow complex tachycardia. And if there's any depolarization which goes outside the His-Purkinje system, either through an accessory pathway or due to some interventricular conduction defect, it will result in a broad QRS tachycardia, which may be a supraventricular tachycardia with an aberrant conduction, or it may be a ventricular tachycardia. So now, what is this tachycardia? You see that this seems to be a narrow complex tachycardia, but it is not classically a supraventricular tachycardia. I'll tell you the reasons why. Because one, if you look at this ECG, you find some capture beats here. What I mean to say by capture beats is that the morphology of this QRS is different from the rest of the QRS complexes. It is narrower, and these capture beats actually indicate that this is probably a ventricular tachycardia. The other thing that you see is a VA dissociation. There are certain A waves that you see here, but they are not associated with the pre-existing QRS complex. So there is a dissociation between the ventricular and the atrial complexes. So whenever you find that there is a dissociation between the ventricular and atrial complexes, and you find evidence of capture complexes, that means these narrow QRS complexes, which are different from the tachycardia complexes, it is likely to be a ventricular tachycardia. This particular rhythm has a right bundle branch block morphology with a left axis deviation because the QRS in 2,3 AVF is negative, and this typically happens in patients who have a structurally normal heart, and this is actually a fascicular tachycardia, which is also a re-entry tachycardia, but I would not go into the details of that. So this is not really a supraventricular tachycardia. This is a fascicular ventricular tachycardia. Right? So a supraventricular tachycardia not necessarily may be a narrow complex tachycardia. It can at times be a wide complex tachycardia. I will not go into the irregular tachycardias and the irregular wide complex tachycardias, which is beyond the scope of this talk. But a regular narrow QRS tachycardia can be a sinus tachycardia, can be an atrial flutter. It can be a AV junctional reciprocating tachycardia, which means that it needs the AV node for the arrhythmia to happen. So this can be either be an AV nodal re-entry tachycardia or a atrioventricular reciprocating tachycardia where it needs the accessory pathway. It could also be an atrial tachycardia, and rarely we find patients of junctional ectopic tachycardia. These are usually in the pediatric age group and not usually seen in the adults. Some cases of regular tachycardia can also be supraventricular tachycardias with a wide QRS, and these are patients who have a supraventricular tachycardia with a bundle branch block. So if they have a pre-existing right bundle branch block or a left bundle branch block, that can result in a wide QRS tachycardia, but it may still be a supraventricular tachycardia. Any of these tachycardias can manifest with a broad QRS tachycardia if there's a pre-existing bundle branch block. And then there are some patients who may have pre-excitation syndrome or WPW syndrome where they have an accessory pathway. So in patients with accessory pathways, they can have a wide QRS tachycardia if the ventricular excitation happens through the accessory pathway and the retrograde limb is the AV node. So it's an antidromic tachycardia, which will be a wide QRS supraventricular tachycardia, and that antidromic AVRT can be a broad QRS tachycardia. And some patients may have a atrial tachycardia or a AV NRT with an accessory pathway. So there will be a pre-excited ventricular rhythm, but the rhythm may be a AV NRT or an atrial tachycardia. So that can also manifest as a wide QRS tachycardia. So these are the possibilities in patients who have a wide QRS tachycardia, which is a regular wide QRS tachycardia. You can still have an SVT. So is every SVT a PSVT? That is not true, because supraventricular tachycardias can be of various types. The common PSVTs that we talk of are the AV NRTs, that is AV nodal reentry tachycardia or a AV reciprocating tachycardia. The atrial tachycardias and junctional tachycardias or atrial flutter, we generally do not label them as paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardias because because of their different onset and different offset, and the manifestations are entirely different. So typically, it is the AV-NRT or the AV-RT which are labeled as PSVTs in patients with structurally normal hearts. So how do you assess from symptoms whether it is likely to be an AV-NRT or an AV-RT? So the first thing we ask the patient is, are these palpitations regular? Do they occur at regular intervals, or there is a drop, there is a gap between the palpitations? So usually the supraventricular tachycardias, AV-NRT and AV-RT are very regular palpitations. They usually have a very sudden onset and a sudden offset without any precipitating factors. So there are no triggers for these tachycardias. And usually patients have a long history of these tachycardias. They've been happening for many years, may not have been diagnosed, and ECG sometimes is not possible during the tachycardia because by the time the patient reaches the hospital to get an ECG, the tachycardia is gone. And it at times very, very difficult, and patients are labeled as anxiety and stress induced. And many lots of patients have been to psychiatrists for these kind of palpitations. They're on antipsychotic medications because sometimes it gets very difficult to diagnose these tachycardias. The frequency may not be so much, and the duration may be so short that you're unable to diagnose what is happening. And sometimes when the tachycardia settles down, the patients may give a history that post termination of the tachycardia, they feel like because that happens because of release of natriuretic peptides. So these are and sometimes patients may have giddiness or a blackout or a pre-syncope, but they usually do not result in a syncope or a loss of consciousness. So how do we classify narrow QRS tachycardias? Narrow complex tachycardias can be with regular tachycardias, they can be irregular tachycardias. So irregular tachycardias, I would not go into the details of atrial fibrillation, flutter, multifocal atrial tachycardias. Now, among the regular narrow complex tachycardias, which means that the RR interval is constant, you can have patients who have an AV conduction which is 1:1, which means that for every QRS complex, there is a P wave. There is a retrograde P wave. Or some may have a atrial rate which is faster than the ventricular rate. So again, I would not go into atrial tachycardias and atrial flutter where the atrial rate is much faster than the ventricular rate. I would restrict myself to the short RP component, which is what I'm supposed to be talking to you about. And so patients who have a 1:1 AV conduction can have two types of tachycardia. They can either be short RP tachycardia, that means the gap from the R wave to the neck to the P wave which comes after the R wave. You can see here the P wave which comes after the R wave, which succeeds the R wave. The difference, the gap between the R to the P is shorter as compared to the P to the next R wave. So this is what we mean by a short RP tachycardia. While if the gap from the R wave to the next P wave is longer and the PR interval for the next QRS is shorter, we call them as long RP tachycardia. So my talk will be restricted to you for short RP tachycardias. And amongst the short RP tachycardias, the common tachycardias that you would find are the orthodromic AVRT. What we mean by orthodromic AVRT is that this is a tachycardia which happens in patients who have accessory pathways, which may be manifest in the form of WPW syndromes, or they may be a concealed accessory pathway, which means that the antegrade limb of the tachycardia happens through the AV node, which means that from the sinus node, the impulse goes down the ventricle through the AV node, and then it comes back to the atrium through the accessory pathway, and then again goes down the AV node, and that is how the re-entry circuit is established, which is called an orthodromic AV reciprocating tachycardia. The other tachycardias which are short RP, where the A may actually fall on the V and you may not be able to see a retrograde P wave, is a typical AV NRT, which is AV nodal re-entry tachycardia, where there are two pathways. There is a fast pathway and there is a slow pathway in the AV node. And the impulse travels down the slow pathway and back up the fast pathway, resulting in a typical AV NRT. Junctional ectopic tachycardia, like I said, arises from the fast pathway or near the fast pathway. Typically happens in children, not very common. It's pediatric age group tachycardia, so it's not that common. Typical AVNRT is the commonest form of short RP tachycardia, and thereafter it's the orthodromic AVRT. Atrial tachycardia can sometimes manifest with a short RP tachycardia if a patient has a pre-existing first degree AV block. So the A waves would occur much closer to the preceding QRS complex since the PR interval is longer, and they may manifest as a short RP tachycardia, not a very common presentation. So what does one look at when we look at the ECG during tachycardia? Now this is an ECG, a baseline ECG where you see the P wave, the QRS complex, and the T wave. This is the FC segment. Now this is an ECG of a tachycardia where you don't find the P wave. The retrograde P wave is just not visible, which means that it is falling somewhere on the QRS complex and it is masked by the QRS complex. So you're not able to see it. This can happen with the AV nodal reentry tachycardia or a junctional tachycardia where the P wave is masked by the QRS complex. At times, the P wave may fall just outside the QRS complex. So you see it as a negative reflection. And this can happen with the orthodromic AVRT or at times with the AV nodal reentry tachycardia as well. And sometimes atrial tachycardia, like we said, with the first degree AV block. So here you see the P wave, which is retrograde, and it is closer to the preceding QRS complex. In long RP tachycardias, the P wave would be farther away from the preceding QRS complex and closer to the next QRS complex. So the RP interval, that is the interval from the R wave to the next P, is much longer. This we will be talking in the subsequent talk by Dr. Avinash. So this is what I showed you earlier also, a long RP tachycardia where the P wave is much later. This is the P wave, and so the distance from the R to the P wave is much longer, and the P to the next QRS is much shorter. This is what we mean by a long RP tachycardia. In case the P wave would have been somewhere here, this is a short RP tachycardia. So what are the common short RP tachycardias that we see? Like I said, the typical AVNRT is the commonest short RP tachycardia, and this is followed by patients who have accessory pathways which could be concealed or manifest, which is called a AV reciprocating tachycardia, AVRT. And rarely it's with atrial tachycardias with a long first degree AV block or junctional tachycardia. These two are very rare tachycardias. So the commonest that we see are these two tachycardias. So typically the RP interval is shorter than 90 milliseconds. In fact, in AVNRT, it may be even shorter than 70 milliseconds or even shorter. And sometimes the P waves may fall on top of the QRS complexes. So it may be very short in AVRTs. Usually the RP interval may be a little longer, maybe more than 90 milliseconds. And in atrial tachycardias with a long PR interval also, this RP interval is likely to be long. If you look at it, it will be more than two small squares of the ECG. Now, this is an example of a 12-year-old girl who had an normal. Now, when you look at this ECG, this is an ECG of a tachycardia. If you look at QRS, just after the QRS, which is a retrograde P wave, it's a short RP tachycardia. You can see this retrograde P wave just falling next to the QRS, which actually is the retrograde P wave, which is seen during the tachycardia. So this is a typical example of a short RP tachycardia where you find which is suggestive of a typical AVNRT. This is a resting ECG. Now, when you see this resting ECG during normal sinus rhythm, that S wave is gone. And out here, you see that retrograde P wave is not seen. So, same patient in sinus rhythm, you can clearly make out that tachycardia was likely to be a typical AVNRT based on this ECG. This is what I was trying to show you, this terminal P wave. And if you see V2 is, this is the R prime wave in V1, V2. And this is another example of a short RP tachycardia. Now here, what you find is that you don't see the P waves at all. There is nothing visible. It's just you are unable to identify any P waves in this And this is the ECG during normal sinus rhythm, where we don't find any evidence of pre-excitation. Now, when you look at these two ECGs together, you magnify it, you don't find any P wave. There is nothing, there is no retrograde P wave. You don't see any R prime in V1 or V2. And this is a typical example of an AV NRT where the P wave is being masked, the retrograde P wave is getting masked by the QRS because it is falling on top of the QRS complex. It is so early because it goes back through the fast pathway. So this is an intracardiac electrogram of a patient who has an AV NRT. Now there heart. And these are the atrial electrograms which are seen from the coronary sinus catheter. When you see these atrial electrograms, they are falling right on top of the QRS. This is the QRS complex on the surface ECG. So these atrial electrograms are falling right on top of the QRS complex, which is why in the surface ECG, you are not able to identify any retrograde P wave because these complexes are masked by the QRS complex on the surface, in the surface ECG. It is only on the intracardiac electrograms you can make out that these these are atrial electrograms and they are superimposed on the ventricular electrogram. The last line here you see is the right ventricular catheter. So these electrograms fall right on top of the ventricular electrograms, which is why you can't identify them in the surface ECG. So how do you get a typical AVNRT? Now this is an example. This is a diagram which shows the AV node. The AV node typically has a fast pathway, and most all the conduction in all of us happens through the AV node and goes down the His bundle to the ventricles. There are some people who also have a slower pathway, which is located posterior inferiorly to the fast pathway, and this has a longer refractive period as compared to the fast pathway. At times, these patients may have a supraventricular ectopy or some impulse which comes from the SA node or an ectopic impulse, which comes and blocks in the fast pathway. So fast pathway is not conducive to conduction. It has come early, in which case it conducts slowly down the slow pathway. So by the time it conducts down the slow pathway, it takes some time to reach this point. It goes down the His-Purkinje system and activates the ventricle. But by this time, this fast pathway has recovered excitability, and this impulse then goes back up the fast pathway and then initiates a re-entry circuit, which results in a typical AV nodal re-entry tachycardia. So it goes down the slow pathway and it goes up the fast pathway. So because it is going up very fast, there is simultaneous activation of the ventricle and the atria. So because there is near simultaneous activation of the ventricle and atria, the P waves occur very early in the surface QRS complexes. And that is the reason why you see such short RP intervals of less than 60 to 70 milliseconds. And at times the P waves may actually fall on top of the QRS complexes because the conduction up is very fast and the atria and ventricular are excited almost simultaneously. Now this is an example of, this is a diagram which shows us the tachycardias, AVNRTs. So typically the fast pathway is located at near the tip of the triangle of Koch, and this triangle of Koch is actually formed by the tendon of Cordero, which starts from the eustachian valve till the central fibrous body. There is the septal tricuspid leaflet, and this is the coronary sinus os. So we have a catheter inside the coronary sinus, and this is the ablation catheter, which is placed between the CS os and the septal leaflet, which is the region of the slow pathway. And this is the region of the fast pathway. So the tachycardia goes down the slow pathway, goes up the fast pathway. And when we treat these patients, we actually ablate the slow pathway, which results in which results in a cure. It's actually a cure for this particular arrhythmia. If you ablate the slow pathway, almost 95% of patients get cured of this arrhythmia. The success rates are very high, 95 to 98%. And this is a schematic diagram of the same picture. Now, certain advancements have happened now in AVNRT ablation. In the past, we used to these tachycardias using two-dimensional EP techniques where we had multiple catheters and we would go and ablate the slow pathway. With the help of three-dimensional technology, we can mark the site of the coronary sinus, we can mark the site of the fast pathway, we can mark the triangle, and it reduces the radiation time to the patient, to the operator. We can go back to the same site in with the help of this three-dimensional anatomy, and specifically go and target the slow pathway and ablate without using too much radiation. So these are certain benefits, and we can clearly mark the site of the AV node and the risk of damage to the AV node during burning the slow pathways. So these are the additional benefits of three-dimensional technology in patients when we use that in patients with AVNR infection. Though a two-dimensional technology is reasonably adequate to ablate these arrhythmias, but there are certain advantages with the three-dimensional ablation. So this is another similar example. I just want to tell you that AVRT versus AVNRT. Remember the N, there are no P waves. You may not see any P waves. If you are seeing P waves, possibly it's an AVRT. Sometimes it can be an AVNRT also, where the retrograde conduction is slow. But typically, if you're not seeing P waves in a short RP, in a narrow QRS tachycardia, it is likely to be an AVNRT. Pseudo S waves in leads 2, 3, and lead AVS, specifically lead 2, and you have R prime in lead B1. So this is the normal sinus rhythm. You don't see that pseudo S wave, and you do not see an R prime. You don't see this terminal R, which you see during the tachycardia in lead B1. So that's the R prime. So ECG of an AVNRT in lead 2, pseudo S waves. Sometimes these terminal P waves may be very early and they may appear as pseudo Q waves. They may come earlier than the QRS complex. That's not very common. Typically, they come on top of the QRS complex. In about two-thirds of cases, you will find no P waves. In about 30%, you may find pseudo S waves. And very rarely, you may find pseudo Q waves, which may come earlier than the QRS complex. In AVRT, usually the retrograde P waves are a little later, and atypical AVNRT, I would leave it for Dr. Avinash to explain you later. So this is what we meant by the three types of P waves in AVNRT: the pseudo S waves, the pseudo Q waves, and the R prime waves in V1, which I've already explained you. Right. So this is an example of another example of a tachycardia where you find that there are pseudo S waves, and once the tachycardia is terminated, you don't see any of those S waves. So these are all the retrograde P waves. Right? A lot about this. So as we said, in typical AVNRT, the impulse is conducted antegradally to the ventricles through the slow pathway and retrogradely to the atria through the fast pathway. So it's a slow fast circuit, which is why the P wave comes early after the QRS complex and it's a short RP tachycardia. In atypical AVNRT, which later Dr. Avinash will be talking, it's a fast slow circuit. So the circuit goes down the fast pathway and goes up the slow pathway. So because it goes up the slow pathway, the atria is activated later, and that is why the RP interval is longer, but we'll talk about that in the next talk. So this is an example of an atypical AVNRT where the P wave is much later than the preceding QRS, which is a long RP tachycardia. So how does one treat a typical AVNRT? Lasting attacks, and they get okay with some kind of coughing or Valsalva maneuvers or Mueller's maneuvers, gagging. Sometimes, you put cold water on the eye. So these are all vagal maneuvers. And carotid sinus massage can sometimes be taught in younger patients and they can do it at home. So these are certain maneuvers which would terminate a lot of typical AVNRTs, or they may slow down the tachycardia at times and then they may again speed up once you remove the vagal maneuver. But in case the vagal maneuvers fail, then the drug of choice in these patients is adenosine, which 6 to 12 milligrams, which has to be given as a bolus and needs to be flushed immediately, otherwise it will not work. History of bronchial asthma or bronchospasm, where adenosine should not be used, and in such cases, you should use drugs like verapamil or diltiazem. So the drug of choice, like I said, is adenosine, which terminates the tachycardia in about 90% of patients. Alternatively, you can use drugs like verapamil or diltiazem in case there's a contraindication COPD, and the drugs which can be used are verapamil or diltiazem, and they are reasonably successful in terminating almost all cases of typical AVNRT in case they do not subside with a vagal maneuver. Now, when do we ablate these patients? What are the when do we ablate them? So, yeah. So, in patients who have recurrent episodes of AVNRT, which means that they have very frequent episodes spontaneously, not subsiding by vagal maneuvers, the patient gets very symptomatic. These are the patients who are actually candidates. They have a class one indication for ablation, and if they are willing for ablation, then they should be subjected to catheter ablation straight away. But patients who have infrequent episodes, maybe once a year, or have had one or two episodes which have subsided spontaneously, they don't have too much of symptoms, they don't need medication. So these patients can actually be followed up clinically for recurrences. In case they become more frequent, more prolonged, they can be offered ablation. But if they are minimally symptomatic, then they can be just clinically followed up without any medication or without any treatment. In treated with oral beta blockers, diltiazem, verapamil. The other drugs like flecainide, propafenone, amiodarone, I would like to be more reserved using these drugs. Despite using beta blockers, diltiazem, and verapamil, I would try and motivate such patients to undergo ablation unless they have significant comorbidities and do not. The slow pathway catheter ablation in today's date and time is a very safe procedure and should be offered to most patients. And if you try and explain them properly, you give them willing to undergo an ablation if they are significantly symptomatic. So, verapamil and dilzem is recommended as a medical therapy for undergo catheter ablation who are very symptomatic, class 1 indication. Catheter ablation in today's day is a class 1 indication as a first line therapy for patients who have symptomatic AVNRD, and it has a very high success rate of about 95. 1% is less than 1%, and it's a very safe procedure. There are at times recurrences in about 2 to 5% of patients even after ablation. Some recurrences they do get recurrences. And oral beta blockers can also be used for patients who do not want to undergo ablation. Flecainide, propafenone, I would not like to drugs and do not want an ablation. Maybe we can offer them these drugs. We have been through this diagram earlier, like I showed you. The ablation point and the septal tricuspid leaflet. Now, what about AVRT? So now this short RP narrow QRS tachycardia, where you find that there are P waves which are little away from the QRS. So it's a short RP tachycardia. You can see that the P wave is much closer to this is a short RP, not a long RP tachycardia, but it is still not the RP interval is more than 90 milliseconds, more than two small squares. So this is you can see a negative P wave here and a positive P wave in lead 2, 3, and AVF during the tachycardia. So this is, like I said, a short RP tachycardia, but it's more than 90 milliseconds. So what do you think is this tachycardia? Again, I showed you the previous ECG. So here again, you can see that there is a P wave, which is after the QRS. It is a short RP. The RP interval again seems to be more than 90 milliseconds. You can see it's more than two small squares. So this again is an example of a AV is longer. So this is a 14-year-old boy who's had a first episode of palpitation. Here again, you can see this P wave. This being the ST segment. You can see, and this is what leads to the STT changes in patients with AVRT, and which can be wrongly misinterpreted as for coronary artery disease. Comes to you with a very fast heart rate, and you see these kind of ST segment changes and may misdiagnose the patient as having evidence of ischemia, while it is all related to the retrograde P waves which are seen in the ST. So these retrograde P waves can manifest as ST segment depressions because of AVRT. And what is the cause? How does an AVRT, orthotomic AVRT, how does it, what is the mechanism? There's a premature atrial complex. This particular premature atrial complex comes both to the AV node as well as the site of the accessory pathway. It blocks in the accessory pathway, but it AV node because at this point of time, this accessory pathway is refractory to conduction. So once this impulse comes down the AV node, the His-Purkinje system comes down the left and the right bundle branches. By the time it reaches the accessory pathway, the ventricular aspect of the accessory pathway, this pathway is now excitable. So the impulse goes back up the accessory pathway, excites the atria, and then again comes on the AV node formed, and this is what leads to an orthodromic AVRT. An antidromic AVRT is just the reverse of orthodromic AVRT, where this PAC may block in the AV. It comes down the accessory pathway, excites the ventricle, and then goes through the His-Purkinje system, goes back to the atria, and it forms a re-entry circuit, which is retrograde P waves usually fall in the ST segment, and the RP interval is fixed and short, but it's longer than the typical AVNRT. Be on the right side, they can be around the node, they can be in the postseptal region, the midseptal region, the anteroseptal region. So there are different sites. The commonest anteroseptal and midseptal are usually the rarer forms of accessory pathway. So how does one a pre-excitation on a resting ECG, which means that the patient has recurrent episodes of tachycardia, has a pre-excitation, typical WPW syndrome. As the first line therapy. In case the patient is not willing for ablation and does not have a pre-excitation on an ECG, or even if the patient has pre-excitation, you can offer drugs like beta blockers, dilzem or verapamil as if in case the patient is not willing for ablation. But catheter ablation is a class 1 indication for all patients who have a pre-excited ECG and have recurrent tachycardias, because there is a very small risk of these patients developing atrial fibrillation and going on to develop ventricular fibrillation and sudden cardiac death if the refractory period of the accessory pathway is very short. So these patients must be offered catheter ablation as a first line therapy. In case they do not have pre-excitation, which means that they have a concealed accessory pathway and they do not prefer ablation, they can be offered drugs like beta blockers, dilzem or verapamil. And these are second line drugs, flecainide, tocopherol, amiodarone, which can also be offered to patients who have pre-excitation with arrhythmias but who are not willing for catheter ablation. So as I said, catheter ablation of the accessory pathway is patients. Drugs can be used for patients who do not have a pre-excitation on their resting ECG. And flecainide and propafenone are, I would say, second-line drugs for their treatment. 3D mapping now has come up, which has an additional benefit. You are able to localize the pathway better with your catheter without using too much of radiation. So it has an advantage. Now, these are two figures which are showing two different pathways. This catheter, which is in the right atrium, you have a catheter at the base. This is a catheter inside the coronary sinus. This is inside the right ventricle, and this is an the tricuspid annulus in this view looks like this, like a clock, and this is a site where the excessive pathway was present, which was burned. While the CS catheter, the mitral annulus is somewhere here, and we have done a septal puncture and taken a catheter, a transseptal puncture from the RA into the left atrium, and the ablation catheter is at the left free wall where there's an excessive pathway. So you're trying to ablate the excessive pathway on the left side via a transseptal puncture. These kind of pathways can also be approached through the retroaortic route, where we come down the aorta into the left ventricle and we flex our catheter and go up to these sides. So we can burn these left-sided pathways through two different routes. Now, this is an example of a patient who, what I was talking to you about, patient having STT changes during SVT, all these ST depressions, which can be misinterpreted as signs of ischemia during the fast heart rate, but actually these are all related to the P waves which are there in the ST segment, which manifest as STT changes during SVT, and this is typically a feature of AVRT. So these ischemic changes happen in young people. They do not have any CAD, mistakenly diagnosed as CAD, but they are all related to AVRT. So this is an asymptomatic 16-year-old boy who had a regular medical checkup, and look at this ECG. There is a short PR interval, there's a QRS broadening, there's a delta wave. You can see this pre-excitation delta wave. So this is an example of a patient who has a pre-excitation, and there's a very short PR interval, for example of an excessive pathway. This is another patient who has, so we would label him, you may end up labeling him as a left bundle branch block, but if you look at the PR interval, it is much shorter than 120 milliseconds. So, and this is a pre-excitation. This is the delta wave which is seen in lead 1 and AVL, these pre-excitation waves. So this is an example of a patient who has a WW. We would label it WW if the patient is symptomatic and has recurrent tachycardia. Otherwise, we would just call it asymptomatic pre-excitation. So what do we do in patients who have asymptomatic pre-excitation or asymptomatic an ECG which shows a manifest excessive pathway? Now, if the patient is asymptomatic, we can subject them to a treadmill test. And while the patient is undergoing it, so treadmill test is not being done to look for ischemia. What we are trying to do is we are trying to increase the patient's heart rate. And at higher heart rates, we are looking at an intermittent loss of pre-excitation. So if the patient loses pre-excitation at higher heart rates, that gives us an idea about the refractory period of the pathway. So if the patient loses the pre-excitation at a heart rate of 180 or 200 milliseconds, that shows that the refractory period of the pathway is more than 300 milliseconds. So the risk of sudden death due to AF is very low in such patients. And in case the patient is asymptomatic, he need not be treated with any form of medication or ablation therapy. But in case the pre-excitation does not disappear, patient doesn't have symptoms, they should be subjected to an EP study. During an EP study, we must look at the refractory period of the pathway, even if the patient has no inducible AVRT or a tachycardia. If the pathway refractory period is less than 240 or 250 milliseconds, these patients are at risk of ventricular fibrillation in the event of atrial fibrillation, and such excessive pathways should be ablated because there is a risk of sudden death due to ventricular fibrillation in patients who have a very short refractory period of the excessive pathway. And in patients who are at high risk of arrhythmic events, these patients may be considered for ablation. But typically, if the accessory pathway refractory period is less than 240 milliseconds, these are patients, even if they are asymptomatic, they should be subjected to catheter ablation. So this is what I meant. If they have malignant AF with a short RR interval less than 250 milliseconds, they have a 2% risk of VF and a risk of sudden death. And these patients must undergo a catheter ablation. Now, this is an example of a WPW syndrome in a patient who has atrial fibrillation with WPW syndrome. So this kind of tachycardia is typically called an FBI, a fast, broad, irregular tachycardia. So it's very fast, it has broad QRS complexes, and it is irregular. So typically atrial fibrillation is irregular, which is why the QRS complexes are irregular. It is very fast, and it has a broad QRS morphology. And this kind of ECG, if you ever get this ECG, the first diagnosis should be atrial fibrillation with WPW syndrome. It could happen with an underlying bundle branch block, also pre-existing bundle branch block, but this is a classical example of WPW syndrome with atrial fibrillation. And in these kind of patients, this is this is a fast, broad, irregular tachycardia. And if you happen to give verapamil and block the AV node, all the atrial fibrillation conduction would go down the accessory pathway. The patient would land up with a ventricular fibrillation, a sudden arrest. So you need to be very, very careful when you see these kind of tachycardias. And if a patient has a very fast heart rate, has hemodynamic collapse, these are patients who would need DC cardioversion because there is a risk of sudden death in these patients, and subsequently they should be subjected to an RF ablation as early as possible. I have finished. We would take the questions later. So I now hand over to Dr. Avinash for his talk on long RP technique. Uh,
Hi everyone. I'm very sorry for being late today. I joined the talk in between, and it was very lucid talk and very descriptive also at the same time. So my job is half done. Dr. Sofat has already, explained how to distinguish between a long RP and a short RP tachycardia on an ECG. Just to go across the long RP short RP tachycardia differentiation once more, I'll just revise few points. Before that, whenever we say that narrow QRS complex tachycardia, how do you define narrow complex tachycardia? It's any tachycardia less than 120 millisecond. Now, we have to keep in mind that SVT may not be narrow QRS. There can be SVT with aberrancy, and similarly, there can be narrow QRS complex tachycardia, which is not SVT. So SVT can be wide, and similarly, VT can be narrow. So those differentiations we have to keep in mind whenever we are making because traditionally when we say long or short RP, we mean a narrow QRS complex tachycardia in respect to a narrow QRS complex tachycardia. Because when we say that the RP 90 milliseconds less or more, 90 milliseconds is for a narrow QRS, because in a wide QRS, the QRS itself, so usually a narrow QRS is 70 to 80 millisecond. So a 90 millisecond P wave, you can see right outside the QRS. So that P wave will be prescribed to a AVRT. On the other, within this 90 millisecond will be a AVNRT. On the other hand, if it is a SVT with bundle branch block or SVT with aberrancy, the QRS itself will be 120, 130, 140, 150 millisecond, 160 millisecond wide. So if your QRS itself is 140, 150 millisecond wide, you won't be seeing a P wave. So over there, this differentiation that if you don't see P wave, it is a AV NRT versus AV RT will not apply. So whenever we are saying Long RP tachycardia you can still say with a broad QRS, but short RP tachycardia it's very difficult to say with a broad QRS. So that thing has to be kept in mind. So again, we will only be talking about the, right now, the paroxysmal SVT, Dr. Sofat was talking about AVNRT and AVRT, which we usually keep as paroxysmal SVT because rest of the SVTs are considered to be more as compared to paroxysmal when they start. So clues from the symptoms, this already has been discussed. This classification is also being discussed. So I will be mainly focusing about the long RP tachycardia, which is atypical AVNRT, AT, PJRT, and sinus tachycardia. Now, whenever we are diagnosis, this is how we see a long RP versus short RP tachycardia. So long RP tachycardia, whenever the RR interval. So if your P wave is somewhere here beyond the half of the RR interval, it's a long RP. If it is less than the half of the RR interval, then it's a short RP tachycardia. So we'll be talking about it. Even sinus tachycardia. So many times I get ECGs of dilated cardiomyopathy patients with a heart rate of 130 or 140, and it's just sinus tachycardia. And many times it gets reported as atrial tachycardia. How do you a crystal AT will look like exactly a sinus tachycardia. Over there, your clinical context that if a patient is in gross failure, he will be having sinus tachycardia. So your clinical presentation and the overall clinical profile of the patient helps you in differentiating whether it's just a sinus tachycardia we are dealing with or an atrial tachycardia. So there you should always remember or imprint this differential diagnosis list that a similarly, atrial flutter, many times the second flutter wave. So you will have a tachycardia with 150 and your P wave, the visible P wave will be falling as a long RP tachycardia. The other P wave will be falling inside the QRS, so will not be visible or of a long RP tachycardia. So it will appear as if it is a long RP tachycardia, the DD will be 80, but it will be a atrial flutter. So always keep that also in mind. So this will be a mimic of a long RP tachycardia because actually the RP interval is not long. There are actually 2 Ps for every R. So tachycardia, mind you, not a PJRT, but a simple AV reentrant tachycardia if your circuit is big and your of the half of the RR segment. So very rarely you can have a typical AVRT as a long RP tachycardia. So this is what I mean by a long RP tachycardia. So what do you see here? You see a narrow QRS complex tachycardia with a rate of around 130, 140, and our RP interval, which is much larger than the PR interval. So PR interval is roughly 180 than that. So it's a classical long RP tachycardia. So whenever you have a long RP tachycardia, you always give a DD. Before jumping to a conclusion that what it is, you always give a DD. Why do we give a DD? The reason is that the same tachycardia can be ectopic atrial tachycardia coming from somewhere near the negative, so inferior side, and V1 is positive, so somewhere on the left os of the CS or somewhere even just os of the CS because V6, V5, V6 is negative P wave. So that area, just an ectopic atrial tachycardia can give PJRT and AVNRT also can give rise to this type of ECG because 2,3 AVF will be negative in these. So in that case, 2,3 AVF will be positive. So all these three, you will keep it as DD before you work it out and try to find out what exactly this thing is. So always keep these DDs in mind. And this is so these are the DDs. So long RP tachycardias, it can be atrial tachycardias, it can be focal atrial or interatrial reentrant tachycardia, that is your flutters, or it could be a non-atrial tachycardia, which could be a atypical AVNRT, it could be a PJRT, or it could be a AV reentrant tachycardia. So you have to basically distinguish between these two. Why do you have to distinguish between these two? Because your treatment is completely different. Adenosine will certainly help here, certainly. I mean, if you give it properly, 80% chance that your first injection will terminate the tachycardia. On the other hand, your atrial tachycardias, only 15 to 20% of them are adenosine responsive. So adenosine will not be very helpful using it here, and is an expensive injection. So at certain places where cost is an issue, you might find some issues. Although if you give adenosine, even if it is not, it will block the AV node and it will make your P wave apparent. So at least, if not, it will break the tachycardia. If it doesn't break, it will certainly help you in making a diagnosis of atrial tachycardia or a flutter. So definitely adenosine helps. But if you're trying to give adenosine where cost is an issue, you're trying to give for breaking the tachycardia, then. So what is going on here? What do you think is the tachycardia here? So let's see how it goes. So it was going on till here, and suddenly something happened. There's a P wave, and you can see here that there's a negative deflection followed by a QRS, negative direction followed by QRS. Now over here you're in two minds whether it's kind of ECG. Always see that whenever you are saying that it is a part of T wave, it should not in 50% of the QRS. Too much towards the 50 to 70% of the QRS. Always think that there might be some P wave hidden here. So let's follow it and see what happens. So there is a VPC, and what this VPC does is, by retrograde conduction into the His-Purkinje system, it makes it refractory for the next P waves to conduct. So over here, what is happening, there are salvos of P waves which are not getting conducted. So this was a long RP tachycardia, because this, if it is a P wave, then it is certainly falling in more than 50% of the. A long RP tachycardia, which is being made apparent by a VPC, which is making the conduction, depolarizing the retrogradely and making the conduction stop. So all these P waves are now a non-conducted P waves, and these are very apparent. So it's very good to diagnose atrial tachycardia like this. So AVRT, AVNRT ruled out. Whatever is left is atrial tachycardia. So this is a simple a long lead halter that will help you. What other thing you could have done over here is either give adenosine. Adenosine will have a similar response. So if you give adenosine, AV node will block and PP will. What one maneuver has been done in this patient, you can simply do a carotid massage maneuver, and similarly all the P waves, the AV node will get blocked because of vagal surge, and all the P waves will be apparent without blocking the without breaking the tachycardia. And you can see the first conducted QRS, you can see the relationship of P waves, and it is certainly not a T wave which is making this kind of deflection. So it's a long RP tachycardia. With AT or a long RP tachycardia, what we want to see is whether it is AT or it is a non-AT. We lump all those atypical AVNRT and PJRT as non-AT. The reason is that it's very difficult on ECG to comment whether it is a PJRT or it is a atypical AVNRT. What helps is a clinical presentation again. So PJRT will be generally a younger subgroup. PJRTs have incessant tachycardia because it's a slowly retrograde conducting pathway. So atypical AVNRT are more often than not, or mostly you can say most commonly, they are paroxysmal tachycardia. So it will break for one beat and then start again, or it will just not break. They will be running at lower rate. So let's say 140, 150. they will be running continuously, and many times patient present with a dilated cardiomyopathy or a tachycardia-induced cardiomyopathy. So this kind of presentation is more common with a PJRT. So clinical again will help. So this is a representative case of a atrial tachycardia. So in atrial tachycardia, biphasic P wave, we can discuss all these things. And P wave duration, again, we can discuss, because atrial tachycardia will, the P wave duration, the P wave morphology will be different for every case of atrial tachycardia, depends on where it is coming from. What we are concerned here is, we call it a RP-PR ratio. So we see how big is the RP versus PR. So in AT, your RP to PR ratio is usually higher. In atypical AVNRT or PJRT, the RP to PR usually the PR interval is small. So why it is small is because there is no problem in conduction. And in fact, this is one of the maneuvers which we do. We do atrial pace at the rate of tachycardia, and there should be no increase in the conduction across the AV node, and the duration should not be more, the difference, the delta H should not be more than 40 milliseconds. So it's usually a robust conduction, and the RP is usually much shorter than case of a non-AT case, where it is atypical AVNRT or it is a PJRT. So in PJRT, the retrograde conduction is via the slow pathway, and in atypical AVNRT, atypical AVNRT, again, the retrograde conduction is via slow pathway. The antegrade conduction, so this retrograde via slow pathway is not so slow, and the interval which is much shorter. So if you keep a RP upon PR, in AT, it will be much higher. So it will be more than 2.9 or 2.5, but certainly it will be more than 1.75, 1.8. The cutoff is around 1.6. So if it is anything less than 1.6, then it is more likely to be a non-AT tachycardia, which is atypical. If it is somewhat confusing, all you have to remember, if in a long RP tachycardia, the P wave is falling more close to the midline, it is more likely to be a non-AT tachycardia. When I say non-AT, I mean PJRT, atypical AVRT, something like that. On the other hand, if it is a long RP tachycardia, P wave falling closer to the away from the midline and closer to the next R wave, then it is more likely to be a atrial tachycardia. So this is the atrial tachycardia. You can see every R wave as compared to away from the midline. So if you do the RP upon PR ratio, you'll find that it is certainly more than 1.6. So this is thing which is there. So this was the algorithm which was proposed. So basically it's not algorithm. You can see the various again, nothing is dogmatic. No one criteria says that it is absolutely AT or a non-AT in a long RP tachycardia, but certainly they are good hints. So RP upon PR ratio with a sensitivity specificity of around 60%, the positive predictive value is only 75%. More importantly, the absence of negative P wave. So this is very important. If you see a long RP tachycardia where 2-3 AVF are positive, or it's a biphasic or something which is not like a typical. So in atypical AVNRT and PJRT, it will be negative. That's like universal. So it will be negative in those cases. If it is anything but negative, it is more likely to be a ectopic atrial tachycardia rather than the reentrant tachycardias. And similarly, if the P wave duration is wider, then again it is more likely to be a ectopic atrial tachycardia, because it can come from the free wall of left atrium, it can come from free wall of right atrium. In both the cases, the P wave will be, very or left-sided free wall. It can be as big as 130, 140, up to 180, 200 millisecond P wave. So P waves can be bigger in those cases. On the other hand, in case of a septal depolarization of atrium. So whenever we are talking about atypical AVNRT or a PJRT, we are talking about septal depolarization. So from the midline, the atria is getting that is why the P-wave duration is not that clinching point, because any septal atrial tachycardia, so ectopic atrial tachycardia coming from the interatrial septum or ectopic atrial tachycardia coming from the right-sided pulmonary vein, so right superior pulmonary vein, right inferior pulmonary vein, they will also have a narrow P. So septal P is a narrow P, but if negative P wave is, so if the P wave duration is more, then it is more likely to be a AT. So these things you can keep in mind while ruling in or ruling out it. This case, what do you think is this case? So you are having a P wave which is falling somewhere here. You can see here also there's a just falling outside the QRS, and you can see the 2-3 AVF, the QRS is somewhat, the P wave is somewhat positive. So whenever, and in have this kind of P wave, always your DD should go towards atrial tachycardia. It could be a macro reentrant tachycardia, it could be a AT rather than a atypical AVNRT or PJRT. It cannot be, because 2-3 AVF are negative, positive. So that or how you say where exactly it is coming from. So I mean, it's a topic for discussion. It's a separate topic. But briefly, if you have to just focus on two leads, just focus on V1 and AVL. So if something is negative on V1, then it is surely from right atrium. So all crystal ATs, all the lateral tricuspid and negative in V1. Crystal ATs, particularly if your AVR is negative, it's very, very specific for crystal ATs. So crista terminalis, the ring of fire, the most originate. So crista terminalis, AVR is negative. Similarly, V1 is more often than not negative. So whenever V1 is negative, it is a right-sided tachycardia. If suppose it is a negative, if it is a positive negative, again it's a right-sided tachycardia. So positive negative, what does it mean? It means that it's some usual depolarization. Your normal P wave is also positive negative in V1. So if you are getting a tachycardia, long RP tachycardia with a P wave morphology in V1, which is a positive negative, again it suggests that it's from the right atrium rather than the left atrium. On the other hand, AVL is positive, and or it could be a positive negative. You will presume that this will happen. On the other hand, if your lead V1 is positive, then it's more often than not a left atrial tachycardia, or sometimes it can be a negative positive. So if it is a negative or positive, again it's a left atrial focus. AVL in this case can be either isoelectric or it can be negative. You can also see lead 1. So lead 1 most often than not will be a negative. It is if it is. So 2-3 AVF is positive in case of superior origin, and 2-3 AVF are negative in case of inferior origin. So this was left and right differentiation, and this is superior inferior differentiation. So you can add both of them together, and you can say that right atrium superior, right atrium inferior, left atrium superior. What do you do once you find the focal atrial tachycardia long RP? You ablate. It's a class 1 recommendation. The drugs are, class 2A recommendation. Flecainide, some people find it difficult to use, but focal atrial tachycardia is one place where it's a class 2A recommendation. It's as strong a recommendation as a beta blocker. So again, RFA is the only first choice that we have. All the beta blockers and calcium channel blockers or class 1C agents are second choice, and it's a class 2A recommendation. Again, this is a focal atrial tachycardia being ablated by 3D mapping. So you can see that in 3D map, this is using the legacy system. So CARTO 3 version prime now. So we have much advanced catheter, but you can see how the red dot tells you that it is a that focus that it is. So it's a very small focus, 2-3 millimeter focus. Just ablate there and it goes away. So junctional ectopic tachycardia. Now this, this is a part of Dr. Sunil Sofat's talk. I think we didn't discuss it, so I put it here just to go over in few slides. So see a P wave, or you see something like this very rarely. That's a narrow QRS complex tachycardia, and the P wave, the RR interval is faster than the PP interval, and it's absolutely narrow. So this is a junctional tachycardia. So it's completely dissociated tachycardia. The P wave and the QRS is dissociated, and it's very narrow. So it could be focal junctional tachycardia. It could be a non-paroxysmal junctional tachycardia. It's usually automatic or non-paroxysmal. Mostly we see in pediatric junctional tachycardia in otherwise healthy person coming for palpitation complaint. So it's usually, and the drugs are, you can try, there are multitude of drugs with no, practically zero level of evidence. So you can see the level of evidence is C. C means, I say it, you say it, we all say it. So beta blocker is 2A, flecainide, propafone. People have tried everything. So, and everything is a 2A with a level of evidence C. So you can try all of them. You can also treat hypokalemia. You can cool the patient. You can, if suppose it is because of digitalis toxicity, so that is one case where, correcting the toxicity will get rid of it. You can cool the patient, and all those things are there. Vagal maneuvers are important in RP tachycardia. Here that it's either atypical AVNRT or PJRT more likely, or if it doesn't terminate, it will bring out the P wave. Like in this case, either it terminates, so it's AV reentrant, it's a AVRT. If it terminates, it's AVNRT. If it continues with PPP coming, then it's AT, and you can see something like this, and without any isoelectric, or if the PP interval is too fast, the atrial rate is too fast, somewhere near 300 beats or 350 beats, and then it's not ectopic focal tachycardia, it's more likely reentrant tachycardia. Another thing on ECG is to see how the tachycardia terminated. Like I showed you those ECGs. If your tachycardia is terminating with a P wave, then AT is ruled out. All you have to remember is, if you're, while giving adenosine, while giving carotid massage, if your tachycardia terminates with a P wave, retrograde P wave, your AT is ruled out. Why it is so? Because your assumption is that by giving adenosine, both AV block and the tachycardia happened at the same time, and the termination of tachycardia happening at the same time. It usually doesn't happen. So that is why AT is considered to be ruled out, and it's more likely reentrant tachycardia that was terminated. We have again discussed it, that AT is more common. So we have already discussed it. So what is so you can see the rate is around 130. The RR interval is this, and this P wave is peaking outside the RR interval. So it's a long RP tachycardia, and lead V1 is positive and lead 2-3 AVF is negative. So what do we make out of it? Now, these are the tachycardias where, you always have to keep in mind reentrant atrial tachycardia also, particularly if your patient is presenting with heart failure, or, have with a sawtooth kind of P wave, which presents or masquerades as a long RP PSVT kind of a tachycardia. All you need to do is block the AV node by doing Valsalva or carotid massage or giving adenosine, and you will bring out the P waves, the flutter P waves. So that's why these maneuvers are very important while on PJRT or atypical AVNRT or AT. This is a typical counterclockwise atrial flutter. And if you just close these above portion, you can see that the flutter waves are very apparent. So this is how a typical counterclockwise flutter loop looks like. It's a propagation map, old map, and this is how these days we do something called as uh, uh, not a propagation. Yeah, so this is a ripple map. So this is a ripple map. So this is a ripple map and this is a propagation map where we can see. So this is atrial flutter. What we do for atrial flutter is ablation. We ablate the tachycardia. It's class 1 recommendation. Rate control, if suppose it's very dilated heart, patient is sick, we can't do the ablation right now. In that case, rate control is class 1 by giving a beta blocker or enzyme. Again, depending your patient is not in failure. If it is and cardioversion will be a better option over there. So amiodarone for rhythm control, it's a class 2A option, but definitely the best option is catheter, which is recommended by the guidelines for symptomatic flutter for treatment. And mind you, even the guidelines say that rate control is very difficult in flutter. Why? Because you can't control the atrial rate. You can only control the ventricular rate, and ventricular rate is in multiples. So from 300 it goes to 150, from 1 high dose of beta blocker or amiodarone to reach that kind, or diltiazem verapamil. Sometimes your patient cannot tolerate that high dose of beta blockers or diltiazem or verapamil. That's why even the guidelines accept that achieving adequate rate control in typical flutter is sometimes very difficult. So if it is difficult, it's better to cardiovert these patients and then go for ablation. Don't see the other P wave very clearly, you can mistake it for a long RP tachycardia. This is a atypical flutter in a post ASD closure patient where the P wave is coming and they're actually much more P waves. So if you see only this, you will say that it's a long RP tachycardia with the P wave falling outside the QRS. So that's why you have to see the entire picture, and it's definitely a flutter going on where the atrial rate is 300 as compared to the ventricular rate, which is much slower than that. So again, these are the DDs which you have to keep in mind. And again, radiofrequency ablation is the only class 1 recommendation for this because the rate control is very difficult. So the take home message is P waves are your best friend. Look for P wave. If no P wave, then it is AVNRT, like Dr. Sophia. Always give a differential diagnosis because it's very difficult to be dogmatic on an ECG diagnosis. So always give ectopic atrial tachycardia, atypical AVNRT, and PJRT. And then you can use the things like, are the P waves negative? Are the P waves thin or thick? Are they septal P waves? Are the ratio of the P wave, the RP interval to PR interval is more than 1.6 or 1.7. So if it is larger ratio, the P waves are much closer to QRS than the midline, then it's more likely to be an 80 and not the vice versa. So in proper context, always particularly if your patient's rate is 150 and we are dealing with 2:1. And like I said, don't be dogmatic, always be humble while making the diagnosis. And all these arrhythmias are more often than not curable, some more than the others. So thank you. So if we have anyone.
Yes, sir. Sir, we have some questions on chat and also in the question and answers forum. So I'll just read those out for you. So Ish asks how to differentiate between typical and atypical AVNRT.
So that was what the whole talk was all about. Typical versus atypical, it's quite easy to differentiate. If you see a P wave which is falling outside more than half of the RR interval, so it's a long RP tachycardia versus short RP tachycardia. In typical AVNRT, you usually don't see a P wave. So if you don't see any P wave, it's typical AVNRT. However, in atypical AVNRT, it will be a long RP tachycardia. It will be something like So I can show you something like this, the first ECG which I showed. Yeah, so it will be something like this. It will be, you will clearly see a P wave, and the P wave will be more than 50% of the RR interval apart. So it will be a long RP tachycardia. So something like this, 2-3 wave will be negative. So it's very, very, very distinguished between typical versus atypical. Typical, you won't usually see a P wave. When the P wave will be there, it will be something like pseudo R prime or pseudo S. So those are completely different tachycardias. So how to differentiate sinus tachy from other long RP tachycardia? Now that's a very good question. So you can differentiate sinus tachy from atypical AVNRT and PJRT very easily. So atypical AVNRT and PJRT are out. Why they are out? Because 2,3 AVF is negative in those cases. So what is left is sinus tachycardia from ectopic atrial tachycardia originating from somewhere close to sinus node, which is more commonly, the crystal tachycardias, which are confused with the sinus tachycardia. Over there, the clinical presentation and the on and off feature helps. So on ECG, if you see on and off feature, if you see the tachycardia continuing with a block, if you see such kind of things, then it's more likely to be a ectopic atrial tachycardia. On the other hand, if you see very slowly increasing, very slowly decreasing, sometimes the rate is 140, then the rate is 130, then the rate is 120, then 110, and then again 120, 130, something like this. So usually, if a patient is having sinus tachycardia, there has to be some cause for it, either fever or failure, or patient will be in trouble. So all these things, has to be some physiological cause for so much of sinus tachycardia. So whenever you are making a diagnosis that and saying that this patient is sinus tachycardia, not ectopic atrial tachycardia, you have to justify that sinus tachycardia. You cannot say that patient is perfectly fine, absolutely normal BP, no fever, coming with complaint of palpitation, and then you're saying it is a sinus tachycardia. So you have to have some reason for sinus tachycardia. So that's what I meant by you have to justify that if you're saying that it's a sinus tachycardia, there should be something to say that why the sinus tachycardia at rest patient is having sinus tachycardia. So those things, so it's a clinical context which help you to differentiate. So how to differentiate AV-NRT from AV-RT from ECG when no P waves are seen? So again, that's a very interesting question. So as Dr. Sofat pointed it out, is Dr. Sofat there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sir, I will please take the questions. I couldn't see you, so I thought that you're not there.
So you already answered that atypical AVNRT versus typical AVNRT. And usually in an atypical AVNRT, the P waves, there will be a long RP interval. So I didn't really get this question.
Sorry to interrupt.
P waves will not be seen, P waves may not be seen in a typical AVNRT, but in an atypical AVNRT.
Sorry to interrupt. The question was how to differentiate AVNRT from AVRT from ECG when we don't see a P wave.
Okay, so typically, sometimes it may not be possible to differentiate a AVNRT from an AVRT from an ECG, but typically in an AVNRT, you will not see P waves because the retrograde conduction in an AVNRT is very fast through the fast pathway and it overlaps the QRS complex. Usually in an AVRT, you should be able to see retrograde P waves, and that is how you differentiate, but it is not always foolproof, and you may not be able to differentiate an AVNRT from an AVRT only from a surface ECG. Because sometimes even in a typical AVNRT, you will see retrograde P waves, and there are some forms of slow AVNRT where there will be a retrograde P wave, and you may actually consider it to be a AVRT. So it is not a foolproof method of differentiating an AVRT from an AVNRT from a surface.
Yes. And another thing is when you don't see any P wave, either the P wave is hidden inside the QRS, where if you make a diagnosis of AVNRT, you will be right, or the P wave can be hidden in a T wave. So if it is hidden in a T wave, your ST segment can be one of the guides. So if you don't see a P wave and ST segment is down, then sometimes you can assume that it's AVRT. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's no way that you can be 100% sure that it's AVRT or AVNRT. You'll be more right in saying that it's AVNRT if there is no ST segment changes and you don't see a P wave.
And you don't see a P wave. Yeah. So, but it's not a foolproof method, and you
Yeah,
will
yeah.
finally be able to
Certain,
diagnose you
certain.
ET.
So another question is AF with WPW, can we use amiodarone? So yeah, it's a very relevant question.
Yeah, it is a relevant question. So AF with WPW, it all depends on the hemodynamic stability. If the patient is hemodynamically stable, rate is not very fast, you can very well use amiodarone and treat the patient with IV amiodarone. It's only in patients who have hemodynamic instability, who have very fast heart rates, that is where you should go ahead and do a DC cardioversion and not just use amiodarone.
Yeah. So AF with WPW, as per guidelines, we should use cardioversion and not use amiodarone. So we certainly don't do that. However, anecdotal studies are there which say that amiodarone can be used. So it's not that people have not used it
Not
and
use it.
with certain efficacy. People have used it, and there are papers also which say that it can be used with reasonable safety, but that's not what the guidelines say, and there are good reasons why they say that, because amiodarone works on AV node also. That's why you give it in AF patient for rate control. So it's one of the recommended drug. So if you give amiodarone, there's a chance that you might block the AV node before you block the pathway, and then there's a chance that patient can go to VF. So there's no point. If you have a cardioversion facility available, I would not test amiodarone. I would rather cardiovert the patient. If suppose there's no cardioversion, no defibrillation available, and your patient is collapsing, then if you have to give any one drug, then yes, amiodarone can be given. The other alternative we don't have, procainamide. So how to approach a narrow QRS tachycardia in an infant? Approach is quite similar, although it depends on what age group you are seeing. So usually in neonates, the flutters are quite common because the atria are dilated because of the high PA pressure. So a neonate presenting with dilated cardiomyopathy, the flutters are quite common cause for that. So neonatal flutters are common, but as if you go beyond neonatal age, if something develops in middle infancy, the atrial tachycardias are very common. The focal atrial tachycardias are quite common there, and usually again they present with cardiomyopathies, tachycardia-induced cardiomyopathies. So giving
and junctional ectopic tachycardia
are good options. And then again, when you go higher, as the age group progresses, your PSVT, they start becoming more predominant. So over there you see more, so it's more of clinical presentation, because in ECG it will be very fast. So it will be 200 rate, 240, 260 rate. It's very difficult to find a P wave over there. So if you are lucky, you will see a P wave in a long RP tachycardia. Short RP, you will completely miss the P wave. You can't differentiate in most cases between a AVNRT and AVRT. And mind you, AVNRT is also quite common. It's not that we don't see AVNRT in kids. So it's quite common. So again, the whole clinical picture helps. So how to differentiate sinus tachycardia from SNRT? Dr. Sofat, if you like to take this.
See, actually, you may not be able to differentiate it on a surface ECG, sinus node re-entry from a sinus tachycardia, because the P waves would actually appear to be very, very similar on a surface ECG. And so I don't think we can differentiate it on a surface.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very difficult. So P wave morphology wise, there is no way you can differentiate.
There is way you can differentiate on a surface.
The termination. So SNRT, because it's a re-entrant tachycardia, there will be sudden on, sudden off.
Sudden off. It's a clinical presentation which you may be able to say,
so
but not based on a surface.
Warm up and cool down phenomena in sinus tachycardia, whereas SNRT will be sudden on, sudden off. So I think that's the only thing on ECG which we can see. Otherwise, P wave morphology wise, you can't.
But morphology wise, I don't think we can differentiate.
Is it possible to send me recording? Well, that Arzu will take care of that. So Arzu, do we have any more questions?
Sir, I don't think so. There were a few questions on chat. I got disconnected in between, so I'm not sure if they've been answered.
No problem. So I have checked the open question answers. So I don't see any question and answers there. So
there was some
question which said that how do you differentiate ST depression from the P wave inversion and P wave? So So actually speaking, the P wave may actually go on the T wave, and or there may be an ST depression. So I really don't think it's really relevant to differentiate between
Yeah,
the two.
only if you see a hump in a T wave
In
or
a T wave,
a high frequency wave hidden inside the, so T wave is generally a low frequency wave.
yeah.
So if you see any high frequency artifact which is consisting in all T waves, then you can assume, some bump, you can assume that it's a P wave. Otherwise, it's very difficult.
And there's one more. They said that WPW stable patient where flecainide propafenone is not available injection. So see, if a patient has WPW syndrome and has a regular narrow QRS tachycardia, it can be terminated with adenosine diltiazem or verapamil. You don't have to give drugs like flecainide or propafenone for an orthodromic tachycardia.
Yeah.
It's only an antidromic tachycardia where if you need to, even antidromic tachycardias can be terminated with these drugs because you need to block the AV node. You just need to break the circuit. As long as there is no atrial fibrillation, you can use the regular drugs like diltiazem, verapamil, or beta blockers.
And flecainide, propafenone injections are not available.
Are not to be used. So they are not. And as regards amidrone, we've already answered that if you have AF with WW, the treatment of choice is DC cardioversion, and so I mean you should really not venture into medical management, medicine.
So I think, sir, all the questions are over. So if the lead to close down the session.
Yeah. So thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to address, and I think a lot of your questions and clear your doubts. Dr. Avinash gave a wonderful presentation on long RP tachycardia, and which is a more difficult topic than the short RP tachycardia. And the way to approach these tachycardia. And I'm sure this presentation would have helped you would help you in your day-to-day approach to patients with various forms of tachycardia. And what we would like to tell you is that most of these tachycardias are curable. Unlike many other disorders, cardiac disorders, most of the diseases are, we really don't have a cure for them. But these are certain disorders where, by EPS and R medications. So these are really fantastic things. We can actually cure these patients of their illnesses for life, and most of them can go back to lead a normal life without any long-term use of medication, which is what we wanted to emphasize when we wanted to talk about these tachycardia. So I think all of you who come across these patients should to get treated properly, to encourage them for these procedures, and these kind of procedures are reasonably safe nowadays, and any patient who is really symptomatic with these kind of tachycardia should be encouraged to undergo curative therapy like an RF ablation instead of being on long-term medication, especially a younger patient. I would like to end with
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Boston Scientific, Devinder, Arzu, for having us here. It was a really wonderful talk. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, and good night, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sofath. Thank you, Dr. Avinash. It was really wonderful having everyone did benefit from the session. I'll definitely get the feedback and let you know of the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye. Good night.